Record. Okay, we're ready to go. Welcome, everybody. This webinar is on mindfulness and conscious living. And a really great way to start this is to ask you, how many people are multitasking while we have this webinar? I know that it happens to me on Zoom meetings sometimes. I will, look at my email or try to multitask. And that's something we do very much these days. Hopefully that's not what we're doing now, because this will be so interesting and helpful, but it kind of is a comment on our lives today, and it's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. So let's start by looking at our agenda. One of the things that we always talk about on the webinars is that we have a Facebook group, a Chai Mitzvah Inspirational Facebook group. It's a closed group that you can join. I will send the link in my follow-up email. It's very nice because we put out things that have to do with the monthly topic. So a discussion can get going on Facebook as well, so that's something to think about. Let's go forward and start by looking at the themes of this really interesting topic. We tend to run on autopilot to do things like walk through doorways or not pay bills. Sometimes people pay bills. They might even depend on autopilot to get through more slightly difficult situations. You know, if you have experience and you've done something before, you might not have to think it through as much as someone who's not experienced. But sometimes we need to turn off our autopilot and make conscious choices. And that's what this is about. What is the benefit of living in the present moment? And some of the things our themes are living present-minded and full awareness of the moment-to-moment reality as a fundamental construct in traditional Judaism. Daily prayer and Shabbat are Jewish approaches to practicing conscious or mindful living. And what distractions prevent us from living fully present in the moment? For example, texting while you're with someone else. One of my friends said, the most important person you're with is whoever is not there. It's whoever's texting you. And that's funny, but it is very typical of many of us today. How can we learn and practice conscious living in order for it to become integrated into our daily lives in a meaningful way? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. When you do this with your participants, ask them if they can come up with tools to help them slow down and see the world. You might begin by having them list a few distractions that prevent them from living fully present in the moment. Let them know that we'll be exploring Jewish approaches that will help them to learn and practice conscious living. So in addition to things like our texts, there's also when your mind goes. I mean, you can be a person who worries a lot, or you can be a daydreamer. These are not bad things, but they're things to be aware of, fully present.
That's right.
So let's look at the first text, listening with our eyes. And here's some things to think about while we're reading this text, which I'm going to actually read to you. Mindful conscious living has been described as being about living in the present moment. Think about what's the difference between living in the present moment and living for the present moment. Living in the present moment is being aware of what's going on and being part of it and reacting to it. Living for the present moment to me means, and you can tell me if you agree, to me it means not thinking about how this moment is going to affect the next moment. And that's completely different than living in the present moment. Have you ever had a circumstance where mindfulness had real consequences, mindlessness, for like an accident or, accidentally insulting someone, telling something that you forgot you should keep to yourself, or making a major error at work or, in some situation? Accidents are especially physical examples where mindlessness has a real consequence. And how can we become more mindful of the ways that we act, speak, and interact with others? And of course, that has to do with less distraction, and I think more empathy as well as more mindfulness, conscious living. I'm going to read this text, which I really love, and let's think about these things while we hear it. This text is an excerpt from a sermon by the Reb, as quoted by Mitch Albom in his book, Have a Little Faith. It helps to define what is meant by the idea of mindful, conscious living. A little girl came home from school with a drawing she'd made in class. She danced into the kitchen where her mother was preparing dinner. "Mom, guess what?" she squealed, waving the drawing. Her mother never looked up. "What?" she said, tending to the pots. "Guess what?" the child repeated, waving the drawing. "What?" the mother said, tending to the plates. "Mom, you're not listening." "Sweetie, yes, I am." "Mom," the child said, "you're not listening with your eyes." So what does that tell us in relation to these questions that are up here on the screen? I think one of the things about being mindful and conscious and in the present moment is using all your senses. So her mom was listening. Her mom was thinking about what she was saying, but what the mother didn't notice was that the child was waving a drawing, because the child was completely in the moment and she was using more senses. Multitasking is hard, and I think parents have to multitask often. So we might have to turn off and on our presence-ness, but it's something to be aware of as we go through this topic. And I'm, of course, open to any comments or thoughts. Okay, well then, we're starting to think about we find in our heritage that help us to live more conscious lives and more mindful lives. So the first one is Brachot HaShachar. Reciting daily prayers help us to become more mindful of the present. They help us focus on what we determine is important and critical in our lives. It's like a moment to sit and think and sort of get some perspective on your life, rather than all the noise and distractions that prevent us from seeing that which is most important to us. And as you see here, taken from the daily morning service, Brachot HaShachar demonstrates the ability of prayer to remind us of our blessings and our obligations to ourselves and to the world. Originally, these blessings were recited at home before coming to the synagogue, and each of the blessings corresponded to an action upon waking, which is very interesting. These actions and corresponding blessings were to serve as a reminder of the blessings of our, and the work of our daily lives. And by blessings and work, those are not opposites. Blessings are great, and work is great too. We need to work all the time. We need to think, we need to make decisions, and that itself is a kind of a work. So going ahead to Brachot HaShachar, before we read the prayer on the screen here, I want to point out that the version of Brachot HaShachar that we have here, and included in the curriculum, it doesn't reflect the Orthodox version, where Shasani Kirtzono made me according to his will. Men used to be grateful that they weren't women. They don't know what they're missing. And so I think it had something to do with the pain of childbirth, but it's so worth it, right? Right now, all my children are behaving, so yeah. So as we read these, let's focus on how they help us to think about our blessings and our work and be like mindful of our lives. Praised are you, Adonai our God, who rules the universe, for enabling us to distinguish day from night, making me in the divine image, making me a Jew, making me free, giving sight to the blind, clothing the naked, releasing the bound, raising the downtrodden, creating the heavens and the earth, providing for all my needs, guiding us on our path, strengthening the people Israel with courage, crowning the people Israel with glory, restoring vigor to the weary, removing sleep from my eyes. So an interesting activity to focus on the blessings in our lives that we become mindful when we're reciting this prayer. Ask your participants to assign an action from each of their morning routine um, to something listed in this prayer. For example, giving sight to the blind can be opening my eyes when I wake up. There are some examples in the source books you'll see. And infusing these steps with an appreciation of our daily blessings can help anyone to lead a more mindful and conscious life right from the start of the day. So some of the samples of the actions that can correspond to the blessings, they're from the Or Chadash Siddur by Reuben Hammer. And they start with a fourth blessing, and you'll see them listed in your books, some of the corresponding actions. Giving sight to the blind, as we were saying, recited when you open your eyes. Clothing the naked, well, we get dressed every morning. Releasing the bound, sitting up and stretching. Making those bowed down stand upright. Raising the downtrodden. You can say that when you stand up. Creating the heavens and the earth, literally spreading the earth over the waters. You can say when you put your feet on the ground. Guiding us on our path, literally in Hebrew, makes firm one's steps. You can say when you begin to walk in the morning. Strengthening the people Israel with courage, recited upon winding or fastening a belt or a band around the body. It could be tefillin. It could be your belt that you put on in the morning. You're assigning your actions to this. Crowning the people Israel with glory can be said when covering your head, removing sleep from my eyes, washing your face in the morning. Your participants can assign whatever is inspirational to them, whatever they feel these different blessings correspond to their own actions. And it can be a very interesting discussion how thinking about these things on a normal morning can make you more mindful and conscious. I imagine that people anyway do this to some extent. I know a couple of years ago I had to have cornea transplants. I had a disease of the cornea. And one morning I woke up and there was my teapot sitting on the stove and the sun was coming in and it was shining. And I went like, wow, this is something to see. And I have a feeling I'm probably not the only person who's experienced a moment like that. You know, if you're driving down the road and there's a rainbow, everyone pulls over and takes out their phone. You know, so there are moments that your participants might want to think about when things like this have happened. And then they can say our more routine things are something to appreciate as well. And that makes us more mindful or conscious in our lives. Any comments or questions? Okay, let's go on to the next one. Examining my prayer life. So for centuries, the rabbis debated how a person fulfills the obligation to pray. Is the obligation fulfilled through recitation of fixed words at fixed times, like we were just talking about Berachot HaShachar? Or is the obligation fulfilled when we acknowledge God with full intention through personal words that come from our heart, like when you see a rainbow, or when I saw my teapot looking so nice in the sun? That's a time to do a spontaneous prayer. Which one is right? Which one is fulfilling the obligation to pray? I think there's a piece of this debate that's forced, and the message behind it is really that both aspects of prayer are necessary and serve different purposes in our lives. Judaism acknowledges that prayer is not an easy practice. It takes work on the part of the individual. So these texts are examples of the struggles that are part of an active prayer life. An interesting way to introduce this topic of fixed versus spontaneous prayer is to ask your participants to think about routines in their own lives. For example, ask them to think about their preferred method of exercise. Do they like to do the same routine each time, or do they like to mix it up? Like, I ride my bike the same 2 miles almost every day. And if I'm with someone who wants to go a different direction, it kind of irritates me. Because I just want to do what I know I want to get done. But there are other people who are just the opposite. They like to mix it up. What are the benefits of each way of doing it? For example, if you do something the same each time, it becomes part of our lives. It's something we learn and know so well, we can continue to deepen our knowledge and understanding of it. On the other hand, if we make changes, sometimes we're better able to hold our attention and keep ourselves focused rather than having our minds wander to new topics that might distract us from the work at hand. So I think it probably depends on the individual. It would be interesting to have this conversation and see how people react. Just a quick ask, how many people here are the more fixed and the less spontaneous types? Yeah, and the people who might be spontaneous are not on the screen. Yeah. Although Tanya wants to be on the screen. It's not.
Yeah. I think that was one of the things that was hardest about motherhood for me, because up until that point, I woke up in the morning and did the exact same. I brushed my teeth at the same time. I got dressed in the same way each time. And once you have kids, you have to be able to go with the flow a little bit more. And that was a big lesson for me.
Yeah, it's amazing how things like that make you learn about yourself and how you find the bandwidth to expand to do what you have to do, even if it's your first choice, Right. Right. So let's look at the two texts. One is from Jonathan Slater, Rabbi Jonathan P. Slater, and the other is from the Hasidic Masters on Contemplative Prayer. So let's read the first one. This challenge is one that I also face when I pray. I want to be able to express each word of prayer with my full intention. I want to mean what I say. I want to know what I mean, and I want to say what I mean. And I want to be able to pray this way while using the words of the traditional prayer book. So I want to bring my attention fully to those texts, to know what they mean, and to mean what they say, and to have them say what I mean. And I want to pray without being distracted, without my mind wandering elsewhere. At the same time, I also want to be aware of what it is that distracts me, so that I can learn the contents of my own heart and mind. If I can do this in prayer, then perhaps I will be able to do it in the fullness of my life as well, and so live mindfully aware of the truth of my life. So this gives a really deep meaning and a really good self-awareness and growth to spontaneous prayer. But it also shows a challenge. Let's see this poem from the Hasidic Masters. Prayer is never repeated. The quality of each day's prayer is unlike that of any other. This is the inner meaning of the Mishnah's words, one whose prayer is rigid prays without supplication. This can be seen even in the thoughts that distract us from true prayer. They too are different every day. Each day in its prayer, each day in its distractions, until the Messiah comes. So there are a couple of ways we can handle these texts. You can look at the two texts as a whole group, with your group, reading the piece by Jonathan Slater and the Hasidic Masters, and then discussing the first four questions. And I will read them to you because I think they're very interesting. What prayer struggles do these two texts discuss? That's an easy question, so I'm not going to ask you to answer it. They're talking about fixed versus spontaneous prayer. How does fixed prayer help us to lead more mindful, conscious lives? And how can it detract from it? So that's answered in these. And the same question for spontaneous prayer. How does spontaneous prayer help us to lead more mindful, conscious lives? And how can it also detract from it? What might be the downside of reciting only spontaneous prayer? That's a question that I think nowadays is especially relevant, because I think there's been a lot more emphasis on being spontaneous and not going back to what was done before. So what I'd love to one of you answer. What might be the downside of reciting only spontaneous prayer? Well, my answer would be that we are not taking full advantage of our heritage. We're not learning what's there before. We're not learning from other people who have written these prayers. And I know for me, I'm seeing that in biblical times, people had the same struggles I have on a certain level. And I think knowing that my struggles are part of the human condition is in some way comforting. So I think that might be a downside of not using fixed prayer? How does each text find a role for distractions in prayer? So both of these texts, the authors are saying that they are distracted. And I think you might disagree, but it seems to me that their distractions are adding to the prayer because they're finding out what's in their heart by seeing what comes in on its own. And they're applying that to the prayers that they're praying. So that's an interesting thing. It'll be interesting to see what your participants think of that as well. So one thing you can do is, as a group, discuss these 4 questions, and then give the participants some time for their own individual reflection, and have them write actual answers to the next 2 questions in the booklet. Why and when do you, or could you see yourself engaging in spontaneous prayer? And why and when would you engage in fixed prayer? If you go to synagogue, chances are it's mostly fixed prayer. If you're driving down the road and see a rainbow, chances are you're going to have a spontaneous prayer. And then participants can turn to a partner and discuss the role and distraction in prayer. And it's nice to conclude with a whole group discussion on the last question, which I really like. As we sit in communal prayer, we're often distracted by the people around us. How can we turn this distraction into an opportunity to be more mindful of the people in our lives? If anybody wants to try to answer that, I am listening. All I could think of when I read this question was how I like to comment on their clothing, and that's not anything near what I should be doing. But it is good to remember that if we are distracted by the people around us, that people around us are deserving of our attention. Not at the time of prayer, but, in other times.
Nina.
Yes.
Hi, it's Donna. I find we have an interesting congregation. We seem, the middle age seems to be the smallest group in our particular congregation. We have a very large young congregation, and then there are those of us who have been around a long time. And I have found, as past president of the temple and the sisterhood, etc., just as an observation, that the older members of our congregation seem extremely comfortable in a fixed prayer setting. Mm-hmm. And when things change, the older congregants, not myself included, but a lot of the older ones, find it very disruptive. Case in point, I'm a member of the choir. This is new to our congregation. And if we sing the prayers in a tune that they're not familiar with, they leave very upset. They feel that they can't join in the fixed prayer. They feel very left out. And we're trying not to be rote all the time, doing the same thing all the time. So we bring in new arrangements of the prayers, chorally, and the older people really find it distracting, and our younger congregants love it. And I find that really interesting. I was wondering if anyone else felt the difference between age groups and how they seem. I think the younger age group really enjoyed spontaneous prayer, whereas the older ones find comfort in the fact that they always go to shul or synagogue and say the same things over and over. I personally find it comforting most of the time, but I enjoy diversity, and I don't find that our 80s and 90-year-olds are comforted by that at all. I was just wondering if this is just my observation or if other folks feel the same way.
Well, I go to a show where most of the congregants are much older. I would say over 70, quite a few. And we have a new cantor, and she'll change up on the tunes, and it's exactly like you said. They feel very uncomfortable, but what I have found is what they're saying is they have to pay attention before they could just, like you said, go by rote, but because of the changed melodies, they have to really focus and then go back to the book and actually use it to keep up. I just like to throw in that I think this topic is unique to Judaism, and that I don't really know what Mormons do in their worship or what they do in Islam, but I do know that Judaism having the fixed prayers, I'll just throw this out for myself. It's good because you feel grounded, you feel the unison with the rest of the congregation. It's very good something to hear everyone hear in your ears, everyone else praying, the same words rolling off your lips that's coming into your ear from those around you. And then it also feels this freedom and liberty to go before God in prayer, and that spontaneous prayer where if you're feeling frustrated, you can have that time and put that before God and in prayer. And if you're feeling good, if you're feeling sad, if you see a rainbow, I mean, I think this is really unique to Judaism, and something I enjoy having the both of those together.
I think you expressed that so beautifully.
Thank you.
For recording this webinar, because that's something to go back and listen to. And when I send out the link, I'm going to say, fast forward to this. Here it is. It's very true. And it's interesting, Donna, that you compared the doing things by rote to the fixed prayer, because it's true. It's not rote in terms of like, I'm not thinking about it. It's comforting. And it's interesting that there is a certain comfort in what you know.
Always.
Right? And people pray for two reasons. One of the reasons is to find comfort. Mm-hmm. So I can see that. And it's interesting what you said about the different age groups. It might just be where they are in their lives to a certain extent. It might be really scary being 90. I don't know. But
tomorrow is my mother's 99th birthday.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, wow.
And
Happy
she
birthday to
is
her.
very active, lives independently in her own apartment.
Wow.
And I think she tells me she doesn't go to temple very often because it's difficult for her to move around. She will go to get her hair done once a week.
Wow.
Like right now, my husband is taking her to have her nails done, which is very important because she's keeping her vanity, which is very important to her. At the same time, she doesn't feel the need anymore to go to shul and to pray, but she tells me that she prays every morning and every night. So that's spontaneous prayer. There's a woman who was never raised in a home. She has very little Jewish education. So I got it on my own from my grandparents, actually. And it's interesting to see the 99-year-old. I'm 75. So our needs are obviously very different, each of us being very supportive of the other. And I personally enjoy both types of prayer. Like you said, I love sitting in the congregation and praying with everyone else together. At the same time, I enjoy that time when we have time to pray on our own, and that gives me a lot of good feeling also. So it's a very, very interesting topic. I'm in another type of group. I'm in a Weight Watchers group, and we talk about mindful eating all the time. So I have been really gearing into this mindfulness about my life totally, every portion of my life. I find this very, very interesting and helpful.
It is so interesting. And it's interesting that you can bring it to that as well. Because right. Prayer helps us to become more mindful and more conscious of our lives. And when you're talking about something as basic as eating, to bring that mindfulness in, yep. It's an interesting way to spread the topic. So that's great. So I was going to talk about another way to examine these two texts, but this was such a great conversation. If you can get this going with your participants too. You could also assign pairs and have them discuss the text that way. And again, the conversation is just about what we've been talking about, the benefits and the drawbacks of both spontaneous and fixed prayer. And now that we've had this discussion, comparing that to doing things by rote in terms of prayer, the tunes, and mixing it up with things. I think that's a great thing to bring into it as well. You can do it where they'll have a chart, and they'll make up a chart of the benefits and the drawbacks of each, and you can put the charts up on the wall, and people can go near the one that they agree with most. And in new groups, they can discuss that as well, if you want to do that. And the next activity in here, it's really awesome, and it relates to what we're talking about in a very physical, concrete way. It's mobile prayers. So if you want to do something hands-on, I did this with seniors in the JCC in Scotch Plains, New Jersey. I've done it at conferences. It's a really nice activity. What you need is get some foam shapes, some markers, a hole puncher, 2 dowels, some ribbon, and a Siddur. If you want I have a write-up of it. I can send it to you, a PDF.
So cool.
So each person chooses a prayer. They can think about their favorite prayers. You can have a Siddur there for them to look through. I also put up on the screen, and I did this, something that we'll have here, Brachot HaNehanim, the blessings of appreciation. You can have them look at that. Or they can have something spontaneous they want to write, something that's in their hearts to express their own personal prayers. They might use words of thanks, talk about hopes and dreams, requests, desires. Then each person takes a shape, and they write their prayer, either fixed or spontaneous, on the shape. They can pick a marker and a color that kind of expresses how they feel. Remember to punch a hole at the top of it, otherwise you're going to hang it upside down. And then make the mobile. Just cross the dowels, tie the ribbon up, and tie the prayers at different heights. They make a nice mobile, and hang them together from the dowels. So each shape represents an individual prayer, and the mobile represents the individual's prayers joining together with those of their friends and going up together. When I did this with seniors, they were really, it was right before their lunch, like they all ate in the common dining room. When I brought it in, they got up. They showed each other which was theirs. They were so invested in it and so proud of it. And it was so nice. In fact, every time I've done it, it's really been very meaningful. I've never done it with kids, but I've done it with a lot of different adult groups. And it's a very nice activity.
It's very nice.
Yeah, I think it's very meaningful. And it was interesting, too, because these seniors actually read their stuff out loud. They wanted everyone to know. And a lot of them were really beautiful. A lot of them were just, hoping for their grandchildren to be healthy, or, like just things that were just really nice to share, as well as a few of them who, as you said, Donna, they were prayers that they liked, fixed prayers they liked to say, and they liked to write. A lot of them wrote the Shema, which is, kind of the most basic, but yet like backbone prayer. So that was very nice. And now I'm going to focus a little more on, it might be a spontaneous thing, or maybe it's more of it's a text about conscious living. So it's radical amazement. The great 20th century philosopher, Abraham Joshua Heschel, often began his evening lectures with a simple statement. Ladies and gentlemen, a great miracle just happened. Gasps could be heard throughout the audience. The curiosity was palpable. What great miracle had just occurred? Heschel would pause for effect and then say, the sun just set. Heschel had grabbed his audience with a striking example of his theme. The everyday occurrences in God's creation are miraculous. But we human beings who see the sun rise and set every day have become accustomed to the regularity. We've lost our sense of awe. For Heschel, awareness of the divine begins with wonder. He called for an attitude of radical amazement toward the world surrounding us. To see the world through the eyes of wonder is to see God's presence in everything. It was the biblical prophets who elevated the notion of wonder from surprised reaction to a form of thinking, an attitude that never ceases. The attitude of wonder leads to yirah, which means awe. And so that's a really nice text to read. And if you made a list of distractions in the beginning of this with your participants, ask them to go back and see if they've become aware of anything in Jewish tradition that can help them to get past the distractions and practice radical amazement. I remember when I was really young, I had an apartment with no dishwasher. Then we moved into a house that had a dishwasher. And I remember saying, I wonder how long it's going to take till I think loading the dishwasher is a chore. And I'm not like thrilled that I have a dishwasher. And I think that's kind of true of all of the things that we do with some regularity. I actually live on a large sailboat in the Hudson River. And during the winter, I'm in Liberty Landing, which is, my view is the skyline of New York, but it's only about like half a mile away from me. So the buildings are huge. It's an amazing view. This is my 8th winter there. I don't go outside now and go, wow. But I did for a while. They're like, wow, look where you live. It's like a jewel box, everything's lit up. So I'm trying to remind myself that there are a lot of things that we see every day that we should be more excited about, or that we should just, acknowledge how special they are. And I think that that's what this is about, which leads us to, oops. I don't think I put a Nanin here. Oh, maybe I don't have a slide on it. So, blessings of appreciation, Berachot Nahanin. I will send you a PDF if you want to use this. They're prayers that can help foster this sense of radical amazement. They're said in everyday situations, like we talked about the rainbow a lot. But there are others. On seeing a person with great knowledge of Jewish things, we say, praise are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who gave wisdom to flesh and blood. On seeing a rainbow, on smelling fragrant fruits, on hearing thunder, and other situations. So if you're doing this activity with the mobile, or if you just want to kind of give yourselves a reminder, these Berachot Nehanin are very basic. Also, they're fixed prayers, but they're said at spontaneous times, and you can make up your own. And I'm going to go home tonight and make up a spontaneous prayer when I look at the lit up
skyline.
Thank you, skyline. Okay, my age is showing. All right.
You're in the crowd.
Blame it on your whoopee cough.
I can't think I'm coughing. So I think I make a spontaneous prayer up for Fisherman's Friend.
Are they readily available?
They are. You can get them in CVS. They taste horrible. But give them to your grandsons because they may be really helpful.
I will.
I went to a forum on whooping cough because I was really suffering, and these were recommended. And they're very good. Okay, so let's go on to the next text, which is Shabbat, Biblical Understandings. So another thing that Judaism gives us, another tool for leading a mindful, conscious life is Shabbat. Shabbat's a day set aside to stop all acts of creation and attempts to achieve, to build, and to master our world. We're forbidden from engaging in melacha. So in his essay entitled Shabbat and Holidays in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, Rabbi Joel Roth teaches that melacha is defined as a constructive human act initiated on the Sabbath, demonstrating supremacy over nature. I was always taught that we couldn't engage in anything that was the building of the Mishkan. You couldn't do anything that was part of that. So I think in these modern times, we might need a more philosophical definition of what melacha is rather than a definition of, don't make a spark. But anyway, so a constructive human act initiated on the Sabbath, demonstrating supremacy over nature. That's what we're instructed not to do. On this day, when we are forbidden from engaging in new construction, we have the opportunity to reflect on what is and what we have. We have the opportunity to deepen our awareness of what's in our lives. as opposed to producing more, Shabbat opens up the possibility of deepening our awareness and on our relationship with what already is. And that's something we don't tend to do without Shabbat. I mean, I give a lot of credit to anyone who does it, but I think having a day to do that is very important in making us more conscious of our lives and more mindful. And in addition to the prohibitions of the day, Shabbat's actually filled with positive commandments of what we're obligated to do. Many of these obligations can help us block out our everyday distractions in order to lead more mindful, conscious lives. So there's a long text here that I'm not going to read because, it's not necessary. But I want to share my favorite question about this, which is, what enslaves you personally? That's something to think about on Shabbat. And it's a question that can relate to the texts and can relate to the topic and can relate to the things that hold us back that have to do with, it's another way of being conscious, I guess, of your life. Not only what are the great things to appreciate, but what's holding you back and how do you deal with that? And there's a really nice observation in this section connected to Shabbat that I put on the screen because I want to share it with you. The word refreshed comes from the Hebrew word nefesh. The word nefesh is commonly translated as soul. In his essay entitled Shabbat and Holidays in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, Rabbi Joel Roth notes that this word refers to a person's life essence, their vitality, their psychic energy, or essential character. It seems to convey the idea of a fresh infusion of spiritual and physical vigor, a revival of God's total being. And so here, notice, we're talking about our nefesh, but God's in there. Shabbat activities lend themselves to reviving oneself, both spiritually and physically. So that's, I think, what we should be striving for during Shabbat. I don't go to shul every Shabbat, but I don't do anything that is work. I spend time with friends and family. I have a nice meal, and I think that everybody needs to find their own interpretation of what it is. And I think when you speak with your participants, if you're in groups from your shul, then you probably are all pretty similar in what your observance is. But I think it's important for people to talk about the essence of Shabbat, the essence of your consciousness, and your becoming balanced and seeing your life with perspective, and not focus on the restrictions, but more, as this says, focus on the positive commandments. Does anybody have a comment on that? This cough drop tastes horrible. Okay, so I think that's a very important thing when we talk about biblical understandings. And then we get into a really interesting thing from Rambam, which is very helpful in seeing this both in a modern light and in an ancient light, and in kind of organizing our thoughts about Shabbat. So there are modern understandings of this, which are very much what I talked about before, how Shabbat is not about refraining from work. It's about self-expression and transformation and renewal through a state of inner discovery. It's not like you're just resting. You're having inner discovery and tranquility, and you're like unfolding your thoughts. So this is from Rabbi Irving Greenberg from The Jewish Way, which is a great book. And I'm going to read, these are from 2 different pages in that book. The movement from weekday work to Shabbat rest is a move from acting outward to developing inward. Shabbat is more than a day of being. It's a day of becoming. Rest is more than leisure from work. It's a state of inner discovery, tranquility, and unfolding. The ability to accept and affirm life in its own right frees me to become more than I am, through self-development and through intensified relationships with others. The Sabbath commandment is not to stop working. It's actively to achieve a state of menucha, which is rest, but through self-expression, transformation, and renewal. On this day, humans are freed and commanded to explore themselves and their relationships, until they attain the fullness of being. This Shabbat is a response to routinization by creating a temporal counterculture, an island of special existence within the stream of time. In becoming holy, the human being shifts from unexamined life to examined life, from instinctual existence to conscious being. Only one who is conscious of every moment can make choices or apply a hierarchy of values to every act of life. Thus, the detailed Sabbath ritual, which appears to prescribe everything by rigid rules, is really an assertion of consciousness and one's freedom to imbue every gesture and experience with value. It takes discipline and awareness to make these moves correctly. In this area, as in so many others, freedom grows in the womb of structure, and which I think is really cool. And since every gesture is willed and directional, it is rich in meaning and statement. Every move on Shabbat is part of a dance of holiness. I think he said that beautifully. And I know, so as a child, I was in an Orthodox household, and I'm an artist, so I love to draw. And I couldn't draw on Shabbat. And God forbid, like the end of Passover was a Thursday, Friday. Then there were 3 days in a row I couldn't do that. That just drove me crazy. So I like the thought that it's not prescribing rigid rules. It's an assertion of consciousness. And, you know, imbuing our not doing something with a reason and focusing on the positive of what we get to do because we're not doing this. So in our teen program, there's this Shabbat idea. You turn off your cell phone for Shabbat. I think that's really great in theory. I think that I personally would go insane because that's how my kids reach me. You know, and if I can't get a text from one of my kids and they need me, or even, I mean, my kids are grown up, but knowing that someone might want to reach me that I love and that I won't be there for them is very distracting to me. So I think we have to interpret these rules in a way that makes us focus on the real backbone of what Shabbat is. And that is examining our lives, renewing our souls, and focusing on those things that are meaningful in our lives. So I think it'll be interesting to have a discussion with your participants on what does Shabbat mean to them? How does it help them to lead a mindful, conscious life? What are the things they could do without? What are the things they can't do without? What are the distractions that prevent them from doing this on other days? And how can you modify? I think it'd be a very interesting conversation. And then the next text, which is Rambam, helps put this into a really, exactly what we're talking about in modern understandings. It's organizing it. So it's from the Mishnah Torah, which Rambam wrote in the 12th century. He's known as one of the greatest rabbinic authorities and philosophers, of course, in post-Talmudic times. The Mishnah Torah is a codification of Jewish law, and the whole purpose of it was to clarify the laws found in the Talmud in plain language. The law could be clear and accessible to everybody. So what he said was, 4 duties are stated in connection to Shabbat. 2 are written in the Torah, and 2 on the authority of the scribes, being explicitly mentioned by the prophets in the Torah. So it's written, remember, observe, and the prophets mention honor and delight. And as it is written, and call the Sabbath a delight, and the holy of the Lord closes. So we go to the next slide, we can see what Rambam did and what we can do. The chart on this slide describes the definitions Rambam applies to each of the 4 categories of Sabbath observance. So you can fill in specific Shabbat activities that you think fall under each of these categories. Some of them are done for you. And then you can review the acts you filled in to the 4 quadrants. Which of the acts do you think can help you to lead a more mindful and conscious life? Or how can these acts help you to lead a more mindful, conscious life? So remember, and as Rambam says, remember with words. reciting Kiddush, reciting specific addition to Friday night Amida, reciting Havdalah when Shabbat goes out. So observe. That's all the laws prescribing, well, actually, I think you go down. Remember, honor. No, remember, observe. Zachor. Refrain from productive, creative work. Honor. That's like the anticipation and the preparation for Shabbat. You wear special clothes, you clean the house, take a shower, cook special food, decorate the table with special cloth or polished silver. Delight, joy. Delighting in and enjoying the Sabbath day. Enjoy good food and drink. Enjoy your guests. Sing, rest, play games, take a walk, study Torah. So your participants and you can put in what you would do in each of these categories. And I think it helps you to kind of understand Shabbat in a very organized way. For those of us who like to do the same bike ride every day and not veer off, this is a nice organizational way of kind of dissecting Shabbat and understanding it. And even maybe planning things that would enhance Shabbat for you and enhance how it will bring more mindful consciousness to the rest of your week. So before I go on, I'd love any comments if anybody has. Okay, then I'll go on. So we have some really nice supplemental materials for this topic. We can start with 2 organizations that are dedicated to the practice of Jewish mindfulness. The first one is the Jewish Mindfulness Network. Rabbi Joe Zimmerman talks about what mindfulness is. He says Jewish mindfulness is about bringing to life ancient Jewish practices that can make our lives meaningful each day, each moment, as we've done everywhere we've lived. We've also borrowed and blended other spiritual practices into Judaism and made it our own. So that's what you'll find if you go to this link. It's interesting because we have Jewish yoga, we have Jewish meditation, and they're all meaningful through a Jewish lens, as well as just through a lens. The other one is the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. Those at the Institute have introduced mindfulness meditation as a path that can support and sustain their Jewish lives and the fulfillment of Jewish values. So it's a perfect example of how we've taken things from other cultures and seen them through a Jewish lens and helped them to fulfill our own Jewish values. I'm going to send out in my follow-up email a PDF of this.
Oh, good.
And hopefully the links will be live. You can just click on it. I think that's probably going to hopefully be it. And there are 2 great cognitive neuroscience researchers doing important work on the use of mindfulness techniques to create healthier lifestyles. One is Dr. Richard J. Davidson. He's a pioneer in the field and a confidant of the Dalai Lama. You can learn more about him. He's highly sought after expert in human flourishing, including meditation and related contemplative practices. So you can click on that link and learn more about him. Then there's a great TED talk using mindfulness practices to break a bad habit. And that's by Dr. Judson Brewer, who's a renowned researcher. The last supplemental material we have is the American Mindfulness Research Association. It reviews studies related to mindfulness research. It was created in 2013, and it supports efforts to establish an evidence base for the process. So what you'll see here is reviews of what other people have written about this topic. And that's very interesting because this is a topic that's growing and probably as a reaction to the way our society is going right now. So that covers what we've been talking about. I want to thank you for some really excellent discussions, and I want to ask if there are any questions.
I don't have a question.
Great. Well, I'm going to send out a follow-up email, so there will be some things in it And I will tell the people that are looking at the recording, definitely fast forward, because some of this was amazing. These discussions were amazing. And I thank you for your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nina.
Feeling better.
Thank you.
Feel better. I'll send you an email.
Okay, great. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.